Yeah, good morning, dear colleagues. It's my pleasure to welcome you early this morning to the very first session of this day with the beautiful title, Opening Up Knowledge. Let me start with the session ground rules, which you see on the screen. Please note that this session is recorded and that we will share the recording and the slides afterwards. The most important thing, if you have any questions for the speakers, please type them during their speech in the attendee chat on the left side of the screen. And there are also technical issues. You should check your settings under the icon with the 3 dots, as well as your internet connection. And if you are not lucky, try to rejoin by closing your tab and reusing the link provided. This session comprises 3 papers. It is chaired by me. I'm from the Bavarian State Library in Munich, Germany. I have been a member of the LIBER board years ago, and I'm still part of the conference planning committee. Therefore, this honor is with me. I think opening up knowledge is a key endeavor of a research library. And it is no surprise that this is a central issue in LIBER, but not only a strategic direction of LIBER, but an important reality for the progress and the societal impact of research in daily life. We have experienced this thoroughly in the last month. As you can see, we have 3 main speakers and a speed talk, so it is a very full session. We decided to stick to a tight timetable. If time allows, we will have a short discussion after each paper. If not, we continue with the next paper. And you are, as I said already, invited to use the chat to put your questions and comments to the speakers. The sequence of papers is well orchestrated. You can see it, so stay with us. We start with a large overview on open education policy, advocacy, and practice in the higher education libraries. And here you see Vanessa on the screen. The survey was conducted by SPARC Europe, a long-standing partner of LIBER in its advocacy for open access to research and data. And it is an honor for LIBER that Vanessa Proudman, the director of SPARC Europe and a true personal defender of open education, presents it to us. Thank you, Vanessa, and we expect your talk.
Thank you very much for such a lovely, warm welcome, Claudia. So I'm really looking forward to telling you about the results of a survey a year ago, June, around this time last year. One of my action points when I left the panel on open education was to try to find out a lot more about what libraries are doing in open education, to find evidence of that. So we went away and we developed with the European Network of Open Education Librarians a survey, and I'm going to tell you about the results of those today. So there is quite some activity, but I think what you'll find is there's still a lot of need for expansion in this area. It's still in its infancy, open education, with many of us with our hands full with open science. But let me tell you something about the results. So the goal was to gain insights, as I said. It's particularly in higher education, the practices, policy and practices, and ultimately to help us develop a strategy to up the game on open education and open education resources in higher education in Europe. So the survey was open for 8 weeks in November till January. We distributed it to higher education librarians via our European network, through the SPARC Europe network, also using national library networks, and also on social media and LinkedIn. We analysed 146 responses. We had responses from 28 European countries, and the most responses from the top 4 countries were from Spain, the UK, Poland, and Greece. I had some conversations with leaders of national library consortia, and they said, well, don't expect much from us because, again, our focus is on open access or research data and open science at this moment. So that probably is one of the reasons why we don't see so much from certain countries, but I'm hoping that some of these results will encourage more amongst others today. So we looked at various aspects. So how does the organisational context influence activities? What about the funding? Are there policies in place? What's the role of libraries in managing and implementing open education? What about advocacy and, of course, the services that we're providing? And we have a very rich collection of challenges and benefits, which I'd like to speak to. So I won't be able to talk about everything about this today, but we're publishing the report today, and I will share the link so you can dive in deeper later on. So firstly, if you think about delivering on open education, funding is often a key factor. But what we actually found was that there were only 6 respondents of those 140 odd that had received seed funding to kick off their activities. And also only 10 respondents had a granting program. So what I mean with a granting program is a program that that finances the creation of OER to stimulate growth in that area. So there were very few that had the means to do that. And there were also only 10 libraries that had earmarked a budget for open education. Of the 39 who carried out the most activities, only 7 had dedicated budgets, which shows that a lot of us are working on open education with very limited resources, with little extra funding, and you'll see that as one of the challenges. That probably doesn't come as a surprise because a lot of us have been also building on our open agenda without huge extra resources. Now, policy is also a real stimulus for activity. So we also wanted to find out how far were institutional policies in place and what was the role of the library in the conceptualization of those policies. 27 were reported. 11 libraries were involved in the conception of those 27. We have most of those policies are actually part of an overarching open policy, so feeding into an open access or open science policy, for example, or even including citizen science. But there were some standalone policies. But what we did also find, just one second, so although we had 27 policies reported, as you see from these countries here, just give you a moment. When we asked for the links to those policies, we only got 8. So we need to analyze as to how far those 27 really are have already been launched and are in place. But definitely these 8 can be looked into by yourselves, built upon. There are some really great policies in here. So also, how does the organizational context, so the size of the organization, also your FTEs and how you organize open education in in the institution. How does that feed into the activities that you have for open education? So we found that there was a positive correlation between open education services and the number of students. Also the advocacy activities, but there wasn't a correlation between the services offered and FTEs. So again, showing that those who are involved in delivering on services, they're often managing and making do with FTEs or with limited resources again. We were curious also about as to how far there was a task force in place. So because, of course, libraries are not doing this alone, they're working together with many departments across the institution. And how was that organized? Only 20% reported that there was an internal task force. So perhaps on a more mature level developed. And we also found that if there was a policy in place, it's more likely to have a task force. That probably goes without saying. It was very welcoming to see that 50% of the respondents, the libraries, said that they were taking the lead in open education or OER. You might expect that going out to libraries, and because they were self-selecting, you'll probably find libraries who are doing work in this area filling in the survey and perhaps having a leadership role, but still, I think it's good news and encouraging for others. 7 out of the 9 libraries were involved in conceiving the local policy. And you'll also see that those who were taking leadership, they were also offering more activities, so 5.3 activities versus 3.3. We asked those libraries where open education was housed within their libraries. Often it was in a teaching and learning department. 10 of those were actually from the scholarly communications section. I'll show you a few graphs here. So to implement open education, as I said, collaboration is really key. I hope you can see the slides. It's a little bit blurred here, but you can see that I can't see my slides there because of the button. Hold on a second. The bottom bit. Here we are. Yeah, so we asked libraries how far they were regularly or ad hoc working with certain departments. And of course, it's a key task is to really engage with faculty and academic departments and with IT to deliver on those promises. So you will see here, do see that most engagement and collaboration is with those departments. You see the least engagement with the end users, the students, interestingly, and some respondents really reported challenges with changing the mindsets of senior management. And you see that the Vice Rectorate or senior administration is actually not, they're not engaging too much with those. So I think there's real potential to work more with senior management to get more adoption of open education. But again, this depends on where you are in your institution in that offering. So we also asked about the library skills, and we found that the institutions had higher skill levels in areas where they work together with other departments. And the majority of libraries who provided support in a particular area reported having full or many skills in that area, which was good news, obviously. Here you can see that the full set of skills are in blue, the many skills are green, and the minimal or no skills are in orange. No surprises that information literacy that relates to open education, discovery, which are our strengths. Advice in copyright was was a large an area where a lot of skills were reported, which was somewhat surprising if you look back at some of the LIBER workshops or asking LIBER libraries where does there need to be more competence growth, and that was in copyright. But obviously in this area, the libraries have good competence, which is, of course, essential for delivering on open education. You will see that the lower skill sets are more in the co-creation, so the real collaboration and creation of open educational resources. Now, the services pretty much match with the skills. So many libraries are providing information literacy and trainings, advice on copyright, providing access to those resources through their discovery services, collection management. We also analysed skills versus services, and we also found that there was a lack of local skills on advice on copyright, so that was often acquired outside of the library. Scholarly communication knowledge to a certain extent, which was a bit of a surprise. Knowledge exchange, technical support, no surprises there. Data curation and course pack provision. So now I think this data is the most interesting. We asked what were the 3 top challenges and opportunities that you saw, and which were the top 3 benefits. We had 62 respondents providing full text answers to these. And if you can see the graphic, the most challenges and instances were in the culture and environment sector. So how does that impact? It's about the mindset, the change in the institution. And the most opportunities were relations with various stakeholders and people. So I'm going to take you through some of these, but in the report, I think we have 4 or 5 pages full of reporting on the challenges and benefit. So the key opportunities and benefits identified by the respondents were, of course, increasing quality, access and reuse to educational resources. So we're eliminating barriers to education and increasing equity with that. We're improving the quality of education and access to it. Now, in the culture and environment sector, so whereas there were many challenges, which I'll tell you about shortly, there was also great news to share on the creation of a culture of openness, really being increased also through open policies. There was a positive change to the organisation's ability to adapt, so a lot more seen in that area. There was a rise of the importance of the library and leadership, so built on open science, of course, deepening collaboration with other departments, which is essential, and engaging in national policy development. So not only on an institutional level, but also working on national policies where appropriate. And of course, we are improving skills within our libraries working in this sector. Now, the challenges, though, what was reported widely was that there was often a lack of an institutional or national policy to really support internal work or boost funding in this area. There was still a great challenge in the ability to influence teaching staff. And of course, no surprises, there was a real lack of capacity, which I mentioned earlier, both regards to time and staff numbers. Related to that, the resources, so there was also a lack of funding for the creation of OERs. I talked about the granting programs, which are often not in place. There were also insufficient relevant skills and know-how in-house. And there could also be better technical support for better infrastructure and tools. Still quite some challenges when we want to provide better access and reuse to our open educational material. So, of course, copyright and licensing being a key barrier to access and reuse. A challenge still is sharing good practices internationally and improving the discovery of that material. And we still have a lot to do to change the mindsets in our institutions. There's also still a lack of institutional leadership and understanding of the benefits. So I think what I'm going to do is we have come up with 10 recommendations. We encourage that you explore opportunities to have seed funding, to kickstart efforts, earmark some of your library budget for open education, consider establishing a grant program, invest more in understanding the interplay between the professionals and stakeholders in your institution, take a leadership role, really also look at highlighting some of your champions and engage with those champions to get that message out there, help in develop those policies institutionally and nationally, develop your skills by working together with others, and then above all, locate where your OERs are being created and monitor that growth. So I'd like to end announcing the publishing of our report. I'd like to thank our European network of open education librarians. I'd like you, if you're not yet part of that network, to join us, so send us an email. And also do tell us how we can help you improve on open education in your institutions, get things started, and hopefully this is some inspiration for you to take forward. Thank you very much. I look forward to your questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Vanessa, for a fascinating paper. And you see a lot of applause coming from our very, very large audience, 230 people. We also have a question for you, which comes from Charlotte Wien. Do you think that open education will gain momentum in the post-corona era, given that professors all over the world have been producing online teaching materials en masse?
What were the last two words? Given they were producing online
They
material.
were producing online teaching materials en masse.
Yes, en masse, right. Yes, of course. Yes, I mean, so what we've been discussing in the open education community, the main focus has been providing the facilities to digital access to information and education. But of course, more and more researchers, teachers, students, have been creating those more and more materials digitally, providing access to those, and we need to encourage them to make them open and reusable, to license them appropriately. So I think they're providing them immediately accessible to their local communities, but they're not necessarily making them really open. So we need to encourage that, but it's a great opportunity now to do that, because I think we're going to be stuck behind our screens for the unforeseeable future, certainly for the next month. So this is a really good time to encourage and to show that it's not a large step to really open up some of that material. So thank you very much for the question, Charlotte.
Yeah. Well, I think there's quite some balance to be kept between institutional identity and making access open to everybody. And I would very much hope that there is an incentive to go more and more for openness. And maybe your report also helps in this. We have a question from Alina, whether you have advice on some guidelines to read before starting on an open education project.
So you could have a look at this report firstly. That will give you, I think actually the read for you before you get started is have a look at those challenges and opportunities. It's such a rich collection. I find it really fascinating. So that's a great read. Certainly I can share a number of resources with you. Also, join our network. There are starters in that network, and there are more advanced people in the network, and we share experiences there. And there are also some great organizations doing some really good work in this area that can also inspire you. So do reach out to me, send me an email. Also to this email's fine.
Yeah.
Let's see how we can help.
Okay, and I think if you look at the 10 recommendations, which read a little bit like the 10 commandments, maybe you get all the framework to draft a policy which is meaningful and where you are quite sure that you don't forget about an important aspect, isn't it, Vanessa?
Well, so actually, so they're certainly not to be meant to be the 10 commandments, but they are recommendations. In German, you would say mit Vorsicht zu genießen. So be careful because it all depends on where you are on your open education journey. So I think some of those recommendations will speak to you if you're right at the beginning, and some of them will speak to you when you're actually more advanced. So not all of them will be relevant to everybody, but if you can pick one or two of those out that will help you, something that hopefully there's something new in there for everyone.
Well, thank you, Vanessa. I think that's very important. Just to delimit a little bit, we have another important question. How do you cooperate with institutions outside Europe? Is there a possibility? Well, I think everybody can access your website and get all kind of information for that. But is there a life of SPARC Europe outside Europe?
Yes, actually, I mean, it's a sad factor that Europe is a little bit lagging, well, rather lagging behind the US. So if you look at developments in the US, for example, with open education, there is heaps of inspiration to be called from there. And of course, SPARC in the US has been busy with this for the last almost 10 years. So they have been doing a lot of work in that area, but there are many other international organizations where you can also look at what's going on in Africa, Asia, globally. There is a lot of work going on, not necessarily in libraries, so they're not highlighted as much. SPARC US is, of course, highlighting the work of libraries very much. So the bigger open education international groups, they don't have so many library representatives so far. So I really encourage you to join us in those networks to get the voices of libraries heard and also to be inspired by others outside of the library community.
Yeah, I think that's an important message to those who asked on the chat. The one was from Nigeria, and I think it is really about the community linking and, well, a lot is done on the teaching and university side, but libraries may have a voice in it. And I think that was a wonderful end of the session. Thank you again, Vanessa. We are very much in our timetable and can now go to our next paper. Let me switch the slide for you. Our second paper offers both a showcase and a springboard, and it is provided by the National Library of Sweden. Wikidata as an open, collaborative bibliographic database. We will learn in this talk how a national library can share its resources and better meet the needs of the open web and the open knowledge movement. We are extremely fortunate that the developer of this database, Alicia Fagerving from Wikimedia Sweden, working in partnership with the National Library of Sweden since 2018, is presenting this project to us. But even before she starts talking, we want to congratulate Alicia. Their paper has won one of the 3 LIBER Awards for library innovation sponsored by OCLC. So we are looking forward, Alicia, to your innovative and prize-winning presentation.
Thank you. Thank you. So, hi everyone. My name is Alicia Fagerving and I work as a developer at Wikimedia Sverige. And today I'll speak about Wikidata as an open collaborative bibliographic database and the work that our organization has done around it together with the National Library of Sweden. Wikimedia Sverige, that is Wikimedia Sweden, is a non-profit association based in Sweden and a local chapter of the Wikimedia Foundation, that is the organization that maintains Wikipedia and its sister projects. We work towards making knowledge freely accessible to all humans, and we focus mainly on the Wikimedia projects, the biggest of which are Wikipedia, Wikimedia Commons, and, of course, Wikidata. And we support other organizations, such as schools and universities, museums and libraries, who also want to learn about and participate in the open knowledge movement. Now, while Wikipedia is undoubtedly the most known Wikimedia project, and indeed one of the world's most popular websites, Wikidata has been expanding and garnering interest around the world, including among cultural heritage professionals. Wikidata is a free and open database for linked and structured data. Just like Wikipedia, Wikidata can be edited by anyone, it's collaborative, and it has built-in support for multiple languages. And just like Wikipedia, the content of Wikidata is available for free and can be reused by anyone. And it's licensed as CC0, which is the most permissive license, meaning you don't need to credit the source when reusing the data. Wikidata is powered by a software platform called Wikibase, and the used data model is the resource description framework. And this provides for a flexible content agnostic structure. And as of now, Wikidata has over 87 million items or data entities representing topics, content, and objects such as people, works of art, taxons, publications, and many more. And that data can be easily accessed not only on the website, but also via an API. It can be displayed on Wikipedia and on external websites. It can be downloaded, and there's also a SPARC endpoint. And here you can see a very basic outline of how data on Wikidata is structured. Every entity or item has a unique ID that can be used to access it, and all information about them is stored in the form of RDF triples. There are several thousand so-called properties which describe the data value of a statement. And the properties are created in a community process and range from very general ones, such as instance of, which is the most basic property used to define or categorize the concept, to more domain-specific ones. For example, when describing a book edition, We can add data about its title, author, place, and time of publication, main subject, and so on. And we can also add links to external databases, of which VIAF is one of the most popular ones. So Wikidata is also a hub of external identifiers. There are quite a lot of them related to libraries. Of course, one of the major reasons why Wikidata has grown to over 80 million items is that a lot of data has been imported from other databases. This is something that the community works very hard on because it makes Wikidata both more rich and complete and also more reliable. And now, because the content of Wikidata is licensed as CC0, it means that only data with a compatible license can be imported. This is very important on Wikidata, that only data that is truly open data can be mass imported. One example that we have worked with is the US Public Libraries Survey, which is a dataset published as public domain, which has been imported to Wikidata, creating over 20,000 data items representing American public libraries. And all this work has been made possible by the thousands of volunteer editors around the world. In this respect, Wikidata works exactly like Wikipedia. Anyone can edit, and all the decisions are made via community discussions. Of course, since Wikidata aims to gather the sum of human knowledge and represents many different domains of knowledge, many subjects have dedicated projects and discussion boards where the editors can decide, for example, how a particular type of items should be modeled. Now, bibliographic data, that is the sort of data we are most interested in here, has a very active user group on Wikidata, and the community has created a set of standards on how books and other publications should be described. The data model for books is based on the Ferber model, a bit simplified, that is only making a distinction between work level and edition level items. And this makes it possible to model different editions of a book, including translations, and most importantly, to link them all to a single work level item to make it clear how they all are connected together. And this is the context in which we have been working. Wikimedia Sverige has an ongoing collaboration with the National Library of Sweden, where we examine how the open data published by the library can work in this context, and how the library can both contribute to and benefit from open knowledge projects. And the reason why this is particularly interesting is that the National Library has published quite a lot of data under the CC0 license. This includes the library's authority database, as well as the Swedish National Bibliography, which contains over 700,000 entries of books, periodicals, and other works that have been published in Sweden over the years. So that is quite a lot of data that is free for anyone to reuse. And our collaboration is taking place in a very exciting time for the library, because the National Library of Sweden is the first national library in the world to transition to linked data in its catalog. The new catalog, called Libris XL, is being developed and implemented right now, and it's based on BibFrame 2.0. And it's aimed at making the data easier to understand, to analyze, and to reuse. Most importantly for us, linked data is more compatible with the rest of the web, including platforms such as Wikidata and Wikipedia. So we have been experimenting with importing some of this data to Wikidata. We have made some test uploads, importing data of several hundred book editions from the library's catalog to Wikidata. For this sample, we selected the books that are most often cited as sources on Swedish Wikipedia, which gave both us and the library some insight into how article writers use sources, which is very important on Wikipedia. And we have also worked with the library's authority file, adding authority identifiers to over 60,000 person items on Wikidata. So users can now easily go from a Wikidata item representing a writer to their entry in the library's catalog. And in the process of doing this, we have learned a lot about what makes linked open library data easy to work with and reuse externally. And we have been sharing our experience with the library as they are developing the platforms. And the work we are doing is not unique, which many of you are surely aware of. Several libraries around the world have done very inspiring work with Wikidata. For example, the German National Library has evaluated Wikibase, the software behind Wikidata, as a possible platform for its authority file. The Library of Congress has added Wikidata identifiers to over 1 million entries in its authority database, which is possibly the largest project of this kind. And the Association of Research Libraries has published a white paper on Wikidata, which provides more examples of how Wikidata and linked open data can benefit cultural heritage organizations. There's also an international initiative called WikiCite, started by Wikidata editors, aiming to develop open citations and linked bibliographic data to serve free knowledge, using Wikidata and Wikibase as its platform. And we are keeping in mind that in the grand scheme of things, Wikidata is very young, and this is just a sample of what can be achieved. We are very excited about what the future holds, and there are many open questions that the community gathered around bibliographic data on Wikidata is discussing. For example, could Wikidata become the world's largest bibliographic database? For this to be achieved, we need libraries to share linked open data that can be easily used and ingested, just like the National Library of Sweden is doing. We are excited about the Library of Congress adding Wikidata identifiers to their catalog, because it shows stakeholders around the world that Wikidata is an important platform to keep track of and include in their work. And finally, a major aspect of our project with the National Library of Sweden is providing them with assistance and training about the Wikimedia projects, so they also can become active participants in the open knowledge movement. So I hope this has provided some insight into the work we have been doing. I'm looking forward to your feedback and your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alicia. This has been a fascinating talk and shows to us how the future of bibliographic work will be very much in an open context. I have not yet any questions for you in the chat box, but I think we all learned this lesson that the important thing is about sharing identifiers and that it is necessary to include these Wikidata identifiers into the original catalog or database. Is this true, or do you also envisage a time where from gathering the IDs of different partners, you can immediately address this kind of database repository? For the time being, if I understand well, you store all the identifiers which you might get from Libris or GND or whomsoever.
Yeah, I mean, the more organizations get involved in this work, the more valuable it is.
Yeah. So it's a huge range of identifiers put together in a way.
Yes, yes. I mean, Wikidata is one of its functions is as a hub, as the one central place from which you can reach all the other organizations.
Okay, here are two questions about cooperation with OCLC, and I think that's a very obvious question because OCLC is certainly, for the time being, the world's biggest database. Is there any cooperation in this area?
We are not doing it right now because right now our project is focused on the Swedish National Library. We are working specifically with them right now because of simply stated, because of their data is CC0. And that is a very important issue for anyone who works with Wikidata, data licensing and provenance.
Okay, yeah, so it's really a open and free tool for everybody, and that may cause problems to some. We have a question about adding data, cleaning data. You just put them all together, or is there also a kind of cleaning effort, duplicates, etc.?
That is always involved. Like one big problem that we've had is not all data in the library catalog is linked. For example, data about publishers. Those are stated only as strings. And in order to add data about who published a book on Wikidata, the publisher needs to have a Wikidata item. And this has been a very big issue for us because when that data is represented exclusively as text strings, then it's not easy to identify. It's not easy to know whether like two different strings represent the same entity and so on.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of manual matching and manual work involved.
Okay. There is another question about researchers' Zotero library, whether that could also be used to populate Wikidata. So that is probably about the source of data you would integrate.
Yeah, because as I said, the problem is that the data has to be explicitly openly licensed.
Yeah.
But there is a lot of work done by researchers and information scientists who gather and crowdsource data from different sources. That is done mostly within the WikiCite initiative. So if you go to the link to WikiCite, which has been helpfully posted in the chat, you will find examples of coordinated importing projects that people around the world have done.
Mm-hmm. And there is another question about whether there are other countries and organizations that cooperate with Wikimedia as much as National Library of Sweden does for the time being.
Well, there are quite a number of them. Like two very impressive examples recently are the German National Library, which I mentioned, they cooperate with our German sister organization, Wikimedia Germany, in evaluating the Wikibase software for the authority file. Another inspiring example is the Welsh National Library, which has recently done work to import data about Welsh writers and Welsh books to Wikidata.
So you take very specialized data sets, and there is another question whether you have any recommendations for libraries how they can improve their data in order to make them more useful for you, for Wikidata.
Oh, yeah. Well, as I said, identifiers instead of strings.
Yeah.
That is the biggest thing.
How do you feel about the identifiers which you allocate in the Wikidata context? How stable are they? If we reuse them in other systems, do you have any guess about their long-term future?
The Wikidata community and the Wikidata developers, they are thinking about this issue, and the idea is that the Wikidata identifiers, they are supposed to be stable. The problem is that sometimes Wikidata items are removed or they are merged because there were accidental duplicates created, and that happens. But in that case, the deleted item ID, it works as a redirect to the new one. So there will never be like a completely different item replacing the removed one.
Yeah.
So that is definitely something that we're trying to make as stable as possible.
Well, I think we are all very happy about this this project, because it promises better visibility for all kind of data, and also an extension of the cooperation community, which goes beyond libraries into research, into private, into citizen science, if you want. All people who like to work on this kind of issues and can contribute. But the important message, and I think you stressed it sufficiently, is that there must be the CC0 license in order to make this profitable to the whole world and not hide it in any context. We got a lot of nice links in the chat, and I think they are all kept in the notes, so there will be an extension to this project. Well, Alicia, thank you again. We finished once again very much on time, and can now go to the third paper of this session. The title I like particularly: Retiring an Institutional Repository and the Transition to the New System, a Checklist for the Worried Librarian. This paper will be presented by Eva Slodi, from an e-resources librarian at the University of Zagreb of Humanities and Social Sciences. Eva is engaged in two important projects of the Croatian national e-infrastructure. She will showcase now the transition from an individual institutional repository to a node in a national network, and all this in order to strengthen open access in a community. So Eva, I'm very glad that you will help us to overcome all kind of worries in these issues. We are looking forward to your talk.
Good morning, everyone, and thank Claudia for this very nice introduction. I'm not really sure that I will relieve all the worries that you have. I will maybe try to make you worry even more. I hope I realize that the topic that I'm going to talk about is very practice-oriented and very much rooted in institutional and local experience, but I do hope that I will try at least to show that it has some wider relevance. So when we talk about changing the repository platform, it is happening in the repository landscape that has changed a lot since, I don't know, the early 2000s. And today, development and maintenance of an institutional repository has really become one of the standard tasks and responsibilities of practically every academic library. And unlike the early 2000s, when we only had practically two available platforms or available softwares for building a repositories, that was ePrints and DSpace. Today we really have an immense array of different possibilities and different solutions. They can be commercial or more often non-commercial and open source. We can build repositories on our own as an institution, or we can do that as a consortia on a national level. The solution can be a standalone or hosted. And one important difference, it can be built, the solution can support solely the creation of repositories, but today more often they can have other functionalities. Most notably, some platforms will have CRIS functionalities, which is also very important. There are also different reasons that can make us decide to make a transition and to change another platform after we already have an established repositories. First of them is definitely wanting to add new features and functionalities to our repositories, and that is something that is again stressed very much with the requirements and recommendations of Plan S. And I have put a link to the recent results of the Core Repository Platform Survey, which is, I think, a very useful document that can show which features and functionalities are supported by different repository platforms. And in every situation when we will have to decide on a new platform, this is one of the very useful sources for finding motivation to change or to choose a new platform. Also, sometimes a very important motivation is adaptation to choices made within a wider networks. For instance, for us, it was trying to become a network of national repositories. So that can be an important reason to change an already established repository platform. And of course, one thing that has always have to be in mind is to minimize cost and to optimize workflow and to find a solution which will help us in that direction. So why I think it is relevant to talk about transition and migration of repository platforms. I think that in this landscape that I have described, it is really inevitable that many libraries, many institutions will occasionally, due to changed circumstances in which they operate, will have different needs, and they will decide to change their repository system. However, even though this is clearly the case, there are no ready-made guidelines or best practices that we can rely on. And there are only a few or a very small number of documented and described cases of transition from one repository system to another. I have put links to two documents that I have found and that we have in our institution found as a useful help. Both of those documents are rather old, but I think they are still relevant. One describes the change from for two different repositories. One is an international subject repository for library and information science, ELIS, and another one which is institutional repositories, and they change their system from ePrints to DSpace, and another one from DSpace to ePrints, which was quite a successful effort. And the other one describes the relationship between ePrints as an institutional repository platform and Pure as a CRIS system applied in one university, and the way this relationship between two platforms that are still currently operational, how can that be resolved? So I think that these documents are really useful for everyone who is considering or trying to find a solution to trying to find guidelines how to change the repository platform and how to run the process. What I would like also to call all the attendees maybe is to, if there are other universities and other institutions that are also involved or have recently been involved in changing and transitioning of their platforms, I would really like to know about their experience and connect. So please use the chat box to put some links or contacts. I will try to showcase just one case, which is from my library, Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences library, which is part of University of Zagreb, and the way we try to change the platform for our institutional repositories over the past year. I have to apologize in the beginning because when we were planning the process, and even when I was applying for the LIBER conference and sending the abstracts, I was somehow expecting that the process will be over by this summer, but due to some changed circumstances and shifting priorities in our libraries, both due to pandemic and the earthquake that happened in Zagreb and that damaged our library quite a bit, we have to change some plans. And the migration is still not over. So this is why I said in the beginning that I will not maybe have many answers, more questions still. So I hope that if you have some comments, it will help us more in the remaining of the process. What we did is to shift our repository from the solution that was only institutional and custom for our library. We used ePrints open source software, and we had repositories since 2006. And recently in Croatia, there was a network of repositories built and developed. It is called DABAR. It is centrally maintained and collaboratively developed. And it is again based on open source, Islandora framework. I guess that some commercial solution didn't really, were not really taken in consideration. I guess that when you come from a poor country, then Pure is not really the solution that you will try to apply. So what we now have is actually two repositories. One, the old one is still alive, but is no longer maintained, and we no longer deposit papers in it. And the other one became alive in November last year. It's called Odraz, or Reflection in Croatian. And what we have to do now is to migrate all the content from the old repositories into the new one, while the new one is already operational. And today we are depositing papers in the new repositories. So we hope that during this autumn we will finish the migration. When we started the process, we had some priorities, of course, and we knew that we have to organize the process in a way to preserve the reliability of the repository as much as it is possible, and to not impact the trust of users, and of course to maintain the reputation of a trustworthy source of content in the wider open access network. One thing that we relied on is the idea of interoperability between repository platforms. We hope that it will be a basis for migration, but I have to say that although repositories are built with platforms that are addressed to be interoperable, they employ open standards that also guarantee interoperability. It is not always so straightforward when you really take metadata from one repository to another, and especially not just the metadata, but usage data, user data, and every local data that can be also important in a certain repositories. But besides being a basis for migration, interoperability is also important as a tool to expose the repository content to other discovery services, and of course a way to embed a repository into wider research and communication workflow within the institution, but also on a wider scale. So when we started the migration and building this national network of repositories, it was very much important to make it interoperable with our authentication system, with our student administration system, with local identifiers, with national bibliography, national journal open access platform. So these are the things that were not really realized in the old repository, and they are in the new one. And of course, one important thing even before starting the transition was to take an active role in steering and development of this national repository infrastructure. And it was really the case that the libraries and institutions that had longer established repositories in the past were the ones that were leading this development of the new infrastructure. But at the same time, those few libraries were the ones that had most troubles with transitioning to the new systems, much more than the libraries that didn't really have active repositories before. So we were probably among the last one who made the transition to the new system. Of course, there were numerous technical, professional, and organizational challenges tied to the content migration and to the platform change. We had to take care about the quality control of data migration. That is something we are still working on. We have to work on mappings between metadata, schemas, and more, something that was even more troubling was harmonizing the control vocabularies and introducing control vocabularies that were not present in the old system. And of course, using as much persistent identifiers that we were able to, which were not also present in the old repositories. At the same time, we had to ensure that visibility and indexing of the repository content would stay continuous. We had to take care of avoiding duplicate content, and we had to ensure that the links from the old repositories would stay reliable. Was something that we have seen in several instances is that some old repositories, when transitioning to a new system, simply died, and they are no longer visible on the internet, which is something that we definitely cannot afford to do. And one thing that will also be quite problematic is retaining reliable and complete usage data, because ePrints has a very reliable and very informative statistics usage plugin, while Islandora is still lacking something like that. So it will not be so easy to transfer usage data. Visibility of the repository is also very important issue. We must stress that this change in repository platform had an adverse effect on the visibility and on indexing of repository, especially in, for instance, Google Scholar. We hope that this effect will only be temporary and that we will regain the full indexing and visibility. But right now, this is something we have to closely monitor and finding solutions how to alleviate such problems with that. So after we migrate the old repository content into the new one completely, we will have to disable access to the old site to avoid duplicate content. We will have to keep URAs from the old one to keep redirecting them, so to avoid broken links. And we also have to communicate the change to the relevant registries and discovery service providers like OpenDoor, Paywall, OpenAir, Core, and others. So for the conclusion, I would like to stress one other important thing, and that is that even though the platform change and transition to a new system can really be a challenge, both technically and organizationally, it is also a very important opportunity to bring the institutional repository back to focus within the institution and to make it make this situation an opportunity to redefine, or firstly to define open access policy within the institution, and of course to build a stronger open science community and to make this even more a success story. Thank you all for your attention. I hope that there are some questions, so we can maybe.
Yeah, thank you, Eva. That was a very interesting talk and putting your fingers on quite a number of issues. In the chat, we have a number of documents for you, one also from LIBER. And I think this documentation, which comes out of the chat, will be gathered for the whole audience and put in to your disposal. There are some questions which might be raised now. The one is about, well, it's less a question than a comment, that a colleague personally has built and implemented DSpace and is now upgrading to version 7. Did you look into this option of DSpace? It seems to be to have had a very good development and that it offers a lot of opportunities. Well, somehow we lost the microphone, I think.
Oh, sorry.
Eva.
I didn't quite hear the question as well. Was it about using DSpace as a platform for...
Exactly. For the new repository.
Yes, actually, well, the decision of using Islandora as a platform of choice was made several years ago, and it wasn't just it wasn't just up to my institution. It was chosen on the national level. So we did consider DSpace. I must say I'm not anymore so sure why was DSpace not the one chosen. I think that there were some issues with that. At the time, Islandora seemed very flexible and very, since we were building a network of repositories, I think that Islandora had possibility of building more instances and developing them together more easily than DSpace, but I'm not really sure anymore what was since I was not the only one making this decision, what was the final thing that, but I was, okay.
And there's another question, and I think that's interesting because you want to keep your old repository alive, at least for some time. How will you be directing downloads to the new repository, or will you direct them to the new repository, and how will you track them from both platforms?
Well, that is the thing that worries us most, because we are afraid that as it is now, we are not able to transfer download data from the old repositories to the new one, because they don't have the compatible plugins for usage data. The one from ePrints is much more elaborated and much more informative than the one from Islandora. So what we will try to do is to keep the old repository alive, maybe not accessible over the internet, but at least while the statistics module in the Islandora is developed enough so that we can make the data available but I'm afraid that what could happen is that we will lose some of the usage data, which will make me very sad, but I'm not sure that we can really transfer it very successfully from one system to another.
Okay,
so
thank you.
If anyone has done it, so I would like to hear how and some advices about that.
Well, that's a good opportunity to address a huge community of specialists. And there is another question, which is about your information policy. How did you inform your colleagues and users about the progress of the project?
Well, I guess that our colleagues, if you mean colleagues from the library community within Croatia, we have some sort of national coordinating body for this repository network called LIBER. So we use that as a platform for exchange of experiences and informing others. And with our users, we have simply used some local institutional ways of mailing lists, websites, Facebooks, and so on. So I think that we did use that as I said, as an opportunity to rebrand the repositories. We renamed it, so it has now some sort of existence, which the old one didn't really have. So,
okay. Well, to conclude, let me also point you to LIBER Europe, and there is a note in the chat saying that there has been parallel case studies of repository platform migration projects with the beautiful title, Changing Platforms. But I think we learned once again how important it is to share this kind of documentation, information on a European level, and I think LIBER is the appropriate body to do so. So please come and send your links and just give them in order to have a good documentation for parallel issues, because I think that migration of this kind of platforms will be a continuous effort in the future. We will never arrive at a platform which doesn't change, but migration will continue to live with our data repositories. So thank you again, Eva, for an interesting talk. And we can now switch to the last paper of this session. It is a speed talk, and the speed talk is a new feature in the design of LIBER conferences. Dr. Maja Bokata-Jancic is founder and head of the Slovenian Intellectual Property Institute. Her research and work focuses on intellectual property, especially copyright, and she now has 5 minutes to inform us about shortcomings for text data analytics and present improvements. And these improvements can be implemented by member states in the implementation process. Maya, good luck and thank you for having contributed useful slides to this conference.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this opportunity to talk about copyright reform again. Europe is in the copyright reform since 2016, and today I'm going to present about 2 exceptions that deal with text and data mining in this new directive that member states need to implement until June next year. Like I will present about the importance of big data and why we need to regulate that, why we are happy that we have these 2 new exceptions, and highlight why they are not perfect, and then for the end, how can we improve it. Like, big data is important for artificial intelligence. It's everywhere. Commercial companies use big data. Researchers use big data. It's estimated the European-based data analytics will grow for more than 10 billion at the end of this year and next year. The core of big data is ability of computers to analyze and extract information from structured or unstructured data sets in response to information, to particular instruction, not information, based on algorithm. This process is defined in this new directive as text and data mining, and it has a specific definition as being any automated analytical technique aimed at analyzing text and data in digital form in order to generate information which includes but is not limited to patterns, trends, and correlations. I find it important to put this definition up. So, but to do data analytics and text and data mining, there were no legal certainty in European Union on single market so far. So researchers and others who were conducting this new research technique could not rely on legal provisions. There were some uncertainty whether this is in conflict with copyright law. Some EU member states have, because of these reasons, have already introduced TDM exceptions, but not every member state. And this is not good for European single market, and also it's not good for Europe to compete successfully on global market. So that's why a European legislator decided and recognized the need to introduce new exceptions on this matter. We have 1 exceptions, mandatory exceptions for research purposes for researchers in Article 3, and we have 1 exception for everybody else, mandatory as well. So everybody else, that means for all others who cannot rely on Article 3. The focus of my presentation of the speed talk, which needs to be extremely short, will be on Article 3. So from now on, I prepared slides for both, but I will focus on Article 3 to respect the time limit. So Article 3 introduces the mandatory exceptions, which means every member state will need to introduce this exception in their law. It is aimed to researchers who access materials through educational or copyright heritage institutions for research purposes. It can be done for commercial or non-commercial text and data mining. It is very important that this text and data mining, the use of content, is protected from contracts, or in a way also from technical protection measures. So in case if library signs a contract and in contract is provision that prohibits text and data mining, this provision will be not valid on the basis of these exceptions, which is very good. It is also provided that probably no harm takes place while you do text and data mining, so no remuneration is expected. It's also no time limit for storage regarding our Article 3, But it's also like nothing in there about how you can share results, or also there is nothing how can you access to the materials remotely. It is provided that you literally need to access the institution and then use the materials. So the shortcoming, it's good that we have these two new exceptions that national legislator will need to implement. But during the implementation, many things can happen. It can go in the wrong direction, and we will get ineffective exceptions, or we can improve the exceptions. What worries me most is that the following things. First, technical protection measures in practice can make these exceptions ineffective. So with technology, right holders can inhibit effectiveness of these exceptions, like that the servers and things will not work. It's also like what is worrisome is that there are some special measures requiring secure storage. Then this can complicate things as well. In recitals, the directive discuss the obligations to deposit data with trusted intermediaries. That could really change around or be in conflict with the current policy, how researchers need to deposit data. Also, like limitation of data retention, that can be problematic. And for Article 4 specifically, because in part Article 4, right holders can prohibit text and data mining for persons who are not researchers. If for Article 4, the robot exclusion standard will not be the agreed standard for open web. And also like remuneration, many things can happen. Ideas of right holders are extensive on this matter. And for the end, it's also a question whether the definition of text and data mining is actually includes all kind of data analytics that are needed or that take place in the process of generating artificial intelligence. How can we remedy these concerns? For Article 3, first, we can demand from right holders that if we buy content, then in case if something goes wrong, give us maximum like 74-hour response time and install the access backs. If Netflix can do it, maybe you can do it as well. And it would be good that this sort of provision would be national laws, in addition also like some compensation if this would not be fulfilled. The second thing, it is very important to reject any specific measures regarding secure storage. So in the process of implementation, if this comes up, it would be very important for libraries and for institutions who provide access to researchers to reject this. Also like to reject any requirement to deposit data with trusted intermediaries. I think that research community is well trained how to store and secure data, so no other trusted third persons are needed. For Article 3, it's also like it would be good to include software specifically, because currently it's not specifically included, but copyright lawyers, we know that if you talk about copyright works, software is already included there. What is problematic is that in Article 4, software is specifically mentioned, so we are a little bit confused. Additionally, it would be great that on the basis of InfoSoc directive, that's the old directive from 2001, we would also get provisions to guarantee the ability to access remotely the materials. So the researchers could do remote access for the materials that they would use for text and data mining. It would be also like very useful on the basis of InfoSoc directive to introduce new exceptions for sharing the results of data mining. These two remedies could be implemented in national law on the basis of old InfoSoc directive. And for the end, also, it would be great to introduce a provision in national laws that would guarantee that all exceptions in copyright, including TDMs for all kinds of uses, could not be overridden by contracts. There are new provisions in DSM directive that already imposes this new rule for certain articles, but it would be great if this would be included for all. Regarding Article 4, I will just briefly mention that for this article, similar remedies, but it would be most important to agree about robot exclusion standard as being agreed upon by everybody to regulate what can be done on open web. And so this very, very speedy talk, which was almost done in a time frame that was dedicated to me, more information is available in guides how to best implement DSM directive, and Communia Association prepared those guidelines. I worked on guidelines on Article 3 and 4 with Ben White, old friend or very active member of LIBER as well. And also these slides that you currently enjoyed are derivative of the slides that we prepared with Ben together. So this is all from me.
Well, thank you very much. May I invite all my speakers to join me on the screen? In the end of this session, let me thank on your behalf all our speakers for excellent, inspiring, and interesting content, but especially for having shared this with us in this new and unusual format. All presentations are registered and they can also be accessed at a later time, and thus also by a wider community. Thus, we are not only talking about opening up knowledge, we are currently doing it. Apart our speakers, LIBER office staff, having meticulously prepared this and all other sessions, has earned all our thanks and applause. And I thank you all in the audience for providing good further knowledge, further reading, comments, and particularly applause to the speakers. I hope you enjoy a good continuation of the LIBER conference and that we will all meet in person in Belgrade next year. Goodbye.